Okay, well, I'll make a start. So welcome everybody to this White Rose Forest webinar on ancient woodland. My name's Sian Atkinson. I'm going to host the webinar today. So I'll give you a little bit of background and then I'll introduce our three speakers. I work for the Woodland Trust, but I'm also chair of a White Rose Forest working group on ancient woodland. The White Rose Forest is a partnership of multiple organisations across North and West Yorkshire with an interest in woods and trees. So the partnership has a shared vision of increasing tree cover, both urban and rural, for all the benefits that will provide for people and wildlife. But the White Rose Forest Plan also recognises the wealth of existing woodland, and particularly ancient woodland, the areas most valuable for wildlife. And we want, as a partnership, we want to see as much of this ancient woodland as possible in good, sustainable management to ensure its resilience for the future. So not long ago, we received some nature recovery funding from Natural England, and that's enabled us to identify some key clusters of ancient woodland in the White Rose Forest area, and to identify the ownership of those through land registry searches and make direct approaches to the owners to invite them to these webinars and or to have advisory site visits. So there's absolutely no obligations, and I want to emphasize this, there's no obligations to any landowners following either the webinars or the site visits. Really, we're just so passionate about ancient woodland, we just want to give you the opportunity to get some advice and see what kind of support, etc., is available for you for managing those woods. And whether you're already managing your woodland or not, we just hope that through this process you're going to be inspired by the information that we can provide, maybe to do a bit more or to start managing the woods. So as I said, I'm Sian Atkinson. I work for the Woodland Trust and I manage a team of advisors across Northern England. And the speakers we have today are Liam Plummer, who's one of the advisors in my team, who's going to give a talk with some background about ancient woodland and why it's good to manage it. Then we've got Richard Barrett, who's a woodland officer with the Forestry Commission, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about some of the regulations around woodland management and some of the grants that are available to help you. And then we've got Ewan Downey, who's the programme manager within the core White Rose Forest team, and he's going to talk a bit about how planting new woodland can also help your ancient woodland and some of the support that's available to do that. So before I hand over, just a couple of sort of housekeeping points, if you can keep yourselves on mute. And if you could put any questions into the Q&A or the chat, either is fine, at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So we're going to collect those questions as we go along and deal with all of the questions in discussion at the end of the three presentations so that we can keep things to time. Really welcome any questions. No question is too silly, so just put anything you want to know into the Q&A and we'll pick that up at the end. So without any more ado, I'm going to hand over to Liam to start the presentations.
Right, thanks. I'll just share my screen. Great, can everyone see that? Great, so yeah, thank you, Sian. And as Sian mentioned, my job's an outreach advisor with the Woodland Trust. So I'm really fortunate actually, because my job's just all about helping people who own ancient woodland to manage them sensitively and promote those really special values of ancient woodlands whilst still achieving their objectives. So as Sian said, I think it'd be useful just to spend about 15 minutes or so talking about what ancient woodland is, how you can manage ancient woodland, and why we promote that really. So one question that's often asked is what makes a woodland ancient? And it's not actually necessarily to do with the age of the trees, although you do get some really lovely ancient old trees within them. But it's to do with how long an area has been woodland in a whole. And in England and Wales, this is since 1600. So to put that in context, that's the era of Shakespeare, and ancient woods will predate the gunpowder plot. Ancient woods, they can be an unbroken kind of lineage to the primeval wildwood that cloaks the UK. Others, they can actually be very ancient, but woodland that sprung up on, say, an area that was cleared in the Middle Ages or medieval period rather to farm. So, but on account of all these woods having developed over many centuries, ancient woods have become so immeasurably complex in terms of their ecology and their culture. And on the slide is an old map of Nid Gorge, that's near Knaresborough, and that's just an example of some of what we try and do to kind of map the changes over history. At this point, I'll just introduce a couple of common terms. We often talk about ancient semi-natural woodland and plantation and ancient woodland sites. So on the left, the AS&W, that's where the kind of native natural tree community hasn't generally been cleared and replanted. But that doesn't mean that ancient semi-natural woods haven't been managed. And in fact, almost all of them have. And that's often industrial. So I live in Sheffield, and a lot of the woods around here were coppiced to fuel the metal industry. And they're full of these amazing remnants of that industrial use. On the other hand, the paused plantations on ancient woodland sites, that's where the naturally occurring tree community was cleared and replanted with species normally for timber. Generally, this is post-war, and it sort of reflects the times and the policy and the thinking around woodlands. And there's a few quotes here that just show how that changed within 50 years. So it was initially improving these useless, scrubby, unproductive woodlands to produce quality timber. And now, you know, only 50 years later, we really value those ancient woodlands and their ecology and their cultural history. So it's kind of worth just bearing in mind why we're at the stage we're at. But even within a plantation on ancient woodland site, despite that clearance and replanting, you will still get characteristics of the ancient woodland ecosystem that persist. And restoration is about sort of recognising those key parts and encouraging their recovery. And likewise, the ancient semi-natural woodland, that doesn't necessarily mean everything's fine and it's in rude health. There can be issues with that as well. And just today, I was looking at some stats on ancient woodland, and they only cover about 2.5% of land in the UK. And the stat that kind of jumped out on me is that that's half of the amount of the UK that's private gardens. So, you know, they're really precious and there's not a lot of them left. It's really good as well to sort of think what sort of things come to mind when you say or hear ancient woodland. And quite often people respond with answers around flora. So wood anemone, bluebells, all these flowers that you only really get in ancient woodland, or perhaps magnificent old trees spring to mind. Might be about deadwood and lovely old tangles of fallen trees that are becoming really interesting. And with deadwood comes the fungi. Perhaps harder to photograph is that sense of history you get, which is kind of old earthworks and archaeology within a woodland. You might get really ancient stumps. You might find holloways where people have walked the same route for centuries and it's sunk into the ground. And a lot of these features are really based on the soils within an ancient woodland and the fact our ancient woods haven't really been that disturbed, relatively speaking. There's not been massive amount of significant development, not a lot of ploughing, alterations, stuff like that. So a lot of these features can accumulate over the centuries. And this diagram, it's from one of the Woodland Trust guides, and it just demonstrates the kind of 4 common descriptions of these remnant features, these things that spring to mind about ancient woodland. And in caring for and managing ancient wood, we look at recognising and protecting these. But what's important is that try and think of these only as kind of visual expressions of this much more complicated and complex woodland ecosystem. Richard will talk a bit more about this later, I imagine, but just to recognise briefly that protecting these remnant features, these unique characteristics that about ancient woodland is actually enshrined in UK woodland policy. The forestry standard is sort of the baseline for forestry in the UK, and that requires protection of remnants. And then the woodland assurance standard, that's voluntary. It goes above and beyond that. So, you know, this stuff is really vital and it's recognised as such. Possibly the hardest slide to write for this presentation is how do you express in words the importance and significance of ancient woodland? And they say a picture speaks 1,000 words. So here goes some pictures. And firstly, how do you even match the beauty of spring in an ancient woodland? I don't think you can personally. And then to go to completely the other side of the seasons, you know, that atmosphere of this ancient wood in winter, you know, the significant trees and the layers of history. If you look carefully, it looks like there might be a bit of a wood bank on the left there. There's mystery and there's intrigue. ancient woods have this rich and complex ecology, and this sort of feeling of awe that you get, and the sounds and the smells and the sensations from an ancient woodland, all of that is truly irreplaceable. As Sian mentioned, ancient woods are amongst probably the most biodiverse of all our terrestrial ecosystems, and many of the plants and invertebrates and fungi, and we can't always see them, and to be honest, we don't even always understand them. They can't move out of these woods, and they develop on the woodland's continued existence and suitability. In terms of what ancient woods do for humans, they provide us with livelihoods, leisure, resources for shelter, resources for warmth. They clean air, they clean water, they give us a sense of wonderment, basis for folklore, a sense of calm. They give us food, they shade us from the heat, they shelter us from inclement weather and the snow that's carpeted us overnight. And planting new woodland, it's really important, but new woodland will need over 400 years or more to develop into this sort of level of value and complexity and beauty. So I'm sure you can probably see from the way I'm talking about it, I really believe they're well worth our time and our energy, and that's why White Rose Forest is really keen to help ancient woodland owners. So having established that ancient woods are really important, and what's restoration then? Well, it's a process of making sure, again, those characteristics and those unique values to ancient wood, they're maintained and they're enhanced. So it's about kind of managing the woodland in such a way as to allow more semi-natural characteristics, so increasingly site-native species and ground flora to become prevalent, and then improving like the various ecological features of the woods. It's really easy to think that our ancient semi-natural woodlands are fine, but they're often missing really key ecological features, and that could be, decaying and dead wood and really old trees, areas of open space, ecological dynamism. And it's also really important restoration in terms of building blocks from which woodland creation can expand on, to have those really healthy wildlife that can then move into our new woodlands. This table's taken from a Forestry Commission publication. Without wishing to sound too pessimistic, it's just worth being aware of the pressures that face ancient woodland and why we're really keen to help. And one thing that stands out for this is, alongside the kind of tangible issues of, say, invasive species or conversion with plantation trees, there's these kind of landscape issues around ancient woods often being small, isolated from other woodlands, fragmented, and that can hinder ecological movement between them, makes them vulnerable to the impacts of neighbouring land use and what's going on next to them. So in terms of the nuts and bolts of restoration, well, the first part, you can think of that as first aid, really. It's trying to protect the remnant features and the unique features of an ancient wood that still persist. Often that's managing light to allow ancient woodland flora to survive. So this is flora and other organisms that only really live in ancient woodland, and that's moscatel or town hall clock. It's a really pretty flower that you get in ancient woodlands. And they're adapted to woodlands. They don't like it too shaded, but they don't like it too bright, because they're adapted to being in that sort of semi-shaded condition. It's about giving venerable old trees space and light, especially if younger trees are overtopping them. This tree here is a relic broadleaf within a pause site, so it's kind of giving that a bit more space to grow. It's about addressing threats to woodland ecology. In the picture, that's rhododendron. It's an invasive species and can kind of smother everything. And then there's deer and other herbivore. They can damage ground flora and prevent young trees from growing up. So we're looking at that as an issue. Other first aid work, it might be, say, reducing damage from inappropriately heavy-handed management. It could be soft engineering to sort of direct foot traffic away from perhaps a heritage feature that's vulnerable to exposure, that sort of thing. And then after first aid, you start your treatment. So once those unique features are kind of secured and that first work's been done, we're looking at how to restore that broader ecology. So in a pause site, an ancient wood that's been planted with commercial timber, it's a gradual reduction in that plantation species and using continuous cover forestry to sort of regenerate native broadleaves. It's moved away from clear felling in pause sites. Initially, there was an idea that if you rapidly remove the timber trees, you're helping restoration, but actually, as we've been talking about, the woodland ecology is adapted to being in a woodland condition, and a rapid removal of all the trees is actually quite detrimental to that. In all our woods, ancient semi-natural woods and pause, a lot of it's to do with demonstrating structural diversity. So this image is taken from a woodland management plan template from the Forestry Commission. Again, I think Richard might talk about this in more detail, but it's about how you increase structural and species diversity, decay in wood, open spaces, a mixture of site native species that you would naturally expect in that woodland. This photo is just a really nice example of all that, really. You've got first aid to that lovely oak that's sort of clinging on in the middle of a plantation, letting in more light to that, but it also looks like they've been thinning most of the other plantation species as well to start, you know, allowing younger broadleaf trees to spring up underneath and encouraging ground flora to recover. So why is it important to actually manage ancient woods and be active in your restoration? Well, as we've talked about in most biodiverse woodlands, and often they do require some management to promote and benefit the forms of wildlife that we know is there and often see. It's no secret that the UK is incredibly poor in terms of its wildlife, and these ancient woodlands are sort of some of the hotspots of what's left. We're facing an ecological crisis, so restoration really helps to protect and enhance that really rich wildlife value that persists in our ancient woods. But often I think there's a concern amongst some people that ancient woodland restoration might be restricting management, and it's not at all. Well managed ancient woodland can, and it often does produce objectives such as timber and firewood. So for us, ancient woodland restoration is really about recognising the real special qualities and the values of an ancient woodland. And your management is mindful of this and enhances the biodiversity, but it can also provide for an owner's other objectives. And those objectives, all the other ones, they may include things like non-timber forest products. So that's a chicken of the woods, quite a delicious fungus, but you might be producing fungi and venison for local hospitality. You may be producing forestry materials. There's real benefits to engaging with and getting to know a woodland. So there might be opportunities for learning or for doing green wood crafts like they're doing there. My father-in-law has recently got really into wood turning and he loves it. So all these things are facilitated. And then as everyone's probably aware of, there's these increasing evidence that the mental and physical benefits that you get from being in a woodland. And really suitable ancient woodland management can facilitate this for both yourselves as ancient woodland owners and managers and for local communities as well. So I hope that's given a really brief snapshot of why ancient woods are really important, what restoration is, why you might want to do it. There's so much help available from the White Rose Forest partners, and in terms of the Woodland Trust, there's advisors like myself. We're really happy to do site visits and offer guidance. We do some free assessments on ancient woodlands. We can produce reports that help guide restorations and give follow-up support with sort of producing management plans, which Richard will talk about next, and implementing that work. There's also a link there to a free online course that you can find available from Cumbria Woodlands. So I think that's about it for me, and I will hand back over to Sian. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liam. That's such a nice presentation, and good to see all those kind of pictures of spring flowers when we're all sitting here. A lot of us are probably sitting here looking out at snow. It just reminds us that spring it really is round the corner, and can't wait to get out in the woods. I'm going to hand over now to Richard to talk about grants and regulation, but just a reminder, please do put any questions or comments, if you want to share any comments in the chat or in the Q&A, so that we can pick them up later, then if you could do that. I'll hand over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Sian. I'll just share my screen. Can you see the slide there without the notes, the presentation? Brilliant, thank you. So yeah, thanks for that, Sian. My name is Richard Barrett. I'm the Woodland Officer for the Forestry Commission covering West Yorkshire, and going to chat to you very briefly today about woodland regulations, woodland management plans, grant support and tree health. So felon licenses and EIA regulations. So to protect and sustain England's highly valued trees and woodlands, a felon licence from the Forestry Commission is normally required before growing trees can be felled. Felon licenses shouldn't be considered a blocker to management. They are normally issued for five years and usually conditional on restocking, where operations will create canopy gaps. The objective is to help maintain woodlands in the landscape by securing restocking. There are a number of exemptions that are clearly detailed in the tree felling getting permission booklet, which is freely available online if you go to .gov and search for felling licenses. The Forestry Commission also regulates the creation of new woodlands and removal of existing woodlands through EIA forestry regs. So if the afforestation or planned forest road falls within a certain threshold, it may fall or be classified as a relevant forestry project, and you may need to submit an environmental impact assessment. Your local woodland officer will be happy to provide advice and guidance on any other forestry regulation, because there are a lot. So woodland management plans, what are they? A woodland management plan gives land managers a structured way to plan and organise the sustainable management of woodland, which is UK Forestry Standard compliant, UKFS for short. Why would you want to create a woodland management plan? So creating a plan can demonstrate sustainable forest management, and it supports the planning and implementation of work proposals and their long-term monitoring. The plan lasts for 10 years and is a live document that can be changed and adapted to suit change in the woodland. It comes with a plan of operations, which means land managers can plan for and be issued with a felling license for up to 10 years, when usually without the woodland management plan, it's around 5. So the plan itself is essentially a template in a Word document where you'll be asked to describe and detail things like long-term objectives, the current structure of your woodland and any threats. We also ask for clear and concise maps showing all the woodland on the holding, identifying anything like veteran trees, scheduled monuments, or any designated areas such as SSSIs. If you search for woodland management plans on .gov, there's a couple of completed example plans for you to have a look at, and just to get a feel for what we ask for. We're not looking for masses and masses of information, but the woodland officer that it gets assigned to, who you'll be working with, will ensure that you get the plan to a good standard and ultimately UKFS compliant. So the woodland management plan grant, you can submit a woodland management plan draft at any point throughout the year, and there is a grant funding available to help you produce the plan. It's a good incentive if you're thinking of engaging an agent to produce the plan for you. It's a countryside stewardship one-off grant payment to create a 10-year woodland management plan combined with the 10-year felling license. The payment rates have just increased last January, so we will pay a minimum of £1,500 for the production of a management plan. And once you've got the woodland management plan, that opens you up to countryside stewardship woodland improvement grant, also known as WD2. So the woodland management plan grant cannot be used to pay for the management work itself. It's just to produce the plan. But once it has been approved, it then opens the door to the CS WD2, which is a grant to manage existing woodland. Applications for woodland management are made under the higher tier using the woodland improvement option, WD2, and/or capital items, including woodland infrastructure. You must have an FC approved woodland management plan to apply for CS higher tier, and this grant has a 5-year agreement period and is to improve the biodiversity of woodland and/or make it more resilient to climate change. And how much you'll be paid, so it's a minimum of £1,000 a year. Within WD2, there are a number of supplements that can be added to the grant application where applicable. WS1, which is deer control and management, and the aim is to achieve effective deer management where deer have been identified as a threat to your woodlands, regeneration and/or where deer browsing negatively impacts on woodland features, ground flora or structure. WS2, which is pause restoration and maintenance, and this is to maintain the restoration of pause sites where tree felling work is selected under your woodland management plan. WS3 is squirrel control and management, and is to manage the population of invasive grey squirrels. And WS4, access for people, to enable permissive access essentially by foot across the whole woodland to increase the well-being of the public where access to the woodland is currently limited. So within higher tier, you must carry out sufficient and suitable requirements on the land during the 5-year period as informed by the woodland management plan. These activities can help to support income streams such as the sale of timber, as well as bringing environmental benefits. This might include any thinning work or selective felling of trees, the control of deer or squirrels with additional supplements, and support from an FC deer officer if they're identified as a threat within the woodland management plan. Removing competing non-native or invasive species by mechanical or chemical control. Capital items are also available as part of this grant, and the list is extensive but includes items such as stock and deer fencing. What's going on? Deer fencing, natural flood management structures, high seats for deer control, and work on or around any veteran trees you might have in your woodland. So it's really good that Liam was pointed out the veteran trees information on his previous slides. So regarding veteran trees, I'm sure most of you will have within your woodland blocks. We'd ask for you to identify existing or recruiting veteran trees in your woodland management plan and look to release them of competing trees, usually by halo thinning, which is also a requirement under WD2. There's also a capital item for tree surgery on veteran trees. And we would also be looking for appropriate levels of deadwood habitat within each woodland block in line with UKFS. This can be standing or lying deadwood or in stacks or piles of timber or brush. So tree health and grant support. So there's a growing number of pests and diseases affecting our trees and woodlands. For much more information and detail by national experts, the FC run free annual tree health update days, and the next one is next Monday at Beamish. This place is still available apparently, and one in York on the 24th of April, which is about to be announced. We're also aware of a tree health update event with the Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust on the 28th of March, but we don't have any other details than that. And the Yorkshire Arboretum Tree Health Centre also run a programme of learning events. So ash cloud dieback. Most of you will be familiar with the sites of diseased or removed ash trees over the last 10 years. Impact varies from year to year and from tree to tree, seeing substantial decline in the landscape and high impact on smaller trees and regeneration, which can be prolific from stress mature trees. There is a grant support available via Tree Health Restoration Grant to assist the cost of restocking when removal of infected ash is the appropriate management approach. Phytophthora amorum in larch and sweet chestnut. So Phytophthora amorum or sudden oak death in the US, in the UK context, particularly affects larch, where it acts as a sporulating host, particularly virulent when larch is in proximity to rhododendron. The FC undertake an annual monitoring programme, including aerial surveys, which are about to commence. Where presence is suspected, it's followed up with the ground surveys, and when confirmed, the FC issue a statutory plant health notice, or SPHN, requiring landowners to kill larch trees or rhododendron, usually ponticum, to help reduce the spread. High spore load can affect other tree species and increase risk of further mutation. Tree Health Improvement Grant can support restocking following SPHN enactments and also support removal of younger infected trees and rhododendron from woodlands. So this is how the Tree Health Grant works. So we've got two elements, improvement and restoration. Tree Health Grant pays for capital items to support the management of woodlands to mitigate impacts of tree diseases. So there's two strands, improvement and restoration. Improvement pays for the removal of infected or high-risk host tree and rhododendron species. Restoration elements pay for restocking after diseased trees have been lost from the site. And as per all other FC grants and capital items, the rates and grant caps were revised and mostly increased in January. So there's been a good uplift in money available for those. It's just gone through. So going forward, your local woodland officer can assist you with advice and managing your woodlands, the range of support available and the regulatory processes involved. If you want to get in touch with the woodland officer, there's some details there of the name of the woodland officer in your area. And if you would like to speak with one, you can email the Yorkshire North East at forestrycommission.gov.uk and the information will be passed to the Woodland officer and they'll get in touch as soon as they can. So yeah, that's everything from me. Thank you, Sian.
Thank you, Richard. That's really, really helpful. There's already one question in the Q&A, which we'll pick up after the next presentation. But you know, if anybody else has got any other questions, do feel free to put them in while we've got Forestry Commission here to answer them. And yeah, it's always really sad when we're talking about tree disease, but it's good that there's really some quite good grants available now to help you if you've got tree disease issues in your wood and you need to restock. Okay, so for our final presentation, I'm just going to hand over to Ewan Downey from White Rose Forest, who's going to talk a little bit about woodland creation and how that can help you or help your ancient wood.
Thanks, Sian. Yeah, as I say, my name's Ewan Downey. I'm the program manager. Oh, excuse me, I can't get to see my slideshow. There we are. Hopefully that's on screen. Yeah, my role is primarily leading on our woodland creation program. That's administering the funding that we have. But as the White Rose Forest, we're the community forest that covers North and West Yorkshire. We also have another sort of role in terms of woodland creation, which is promoting it more widely through the White Rose Forest Plan, and we're about to sort of rewrite that as well, and obviously the management of ancient woodlands as well will be a key part of that. But I want to focus the next few minutes just on woodland creation. As has been sort of indicated previously, we are talking, you know, in terms of ancient woodlands about a valuable resource. They're absolutely, you know, fantastic. But clearly, in terms of woodland creation, we can't create what we can see on the screen overnight, but we can hopefully start to create the woodlands of the future that will end up looking like this, but also to help the woodlands that are already in existence. So when we're sort of looking at things like that, we're sort of, you know, for example, we've got an area of ancient woodland here. By adding ancient woodland, new woodland to this ancient woodland, we're extending, we're buffering the woodland, we're protecting it, we're making the woodland more resilient. Climate change has been mentioned, so the larger the woodland is, the more resilient it will be, the protection it has. Also pests and diseases, that we're, you know, increasing the diversity, etc., offering all of that sort of protection going forward. It also, you know, the larger an area of woodland, we're increasing the biodiversity value of that woodland, and also we can enhance the landscape. A lot of our ancient woodlands occur in quite iconic landscapes, and therefore, you know, we're talking about remnants. We're sort of linking them together and making a kind of more cohesive landscape unit going forward, and something that we can all enjoy in the years to come. And also, as we get to a certain sort of scale, we can actually start to see not just extending and buffering existing, but we're starting to link. And as I say, that's really sort of one of the key roles here in terms of woodland creation, but potentially going forward, the potential that, you know, it won't necessarily meet the definition of ancient woodland, but it's certainly native woodland that's going to be of great value in the landscape. I think it's fair to say, and I think Richard sort of touched on it, that sort of support is high for both woodland management and woodland creation, and certainly for woodland creation it's unprecedented levels. You know, the UK government has set a target of 30,000 hectares of new woodland by 2025. It's fair to say we're not quite on target to achieve that, but certainly there is significant funding that's been made available. So it's not, I don't see it as a barrier. There's great opportunities, and there's, you know, there's a range of offers now that are available across the sort of sector. And I'll sort of come on to that in a little bit more detail. The funding that we have aims to cover the planning. So we can also sort of talk about creating woodland creation plans, whether that's through woodland creation planning grant administered by the Forestry Commission, or through funding, other funding options. There's opportunity to support that. So for example, through the White Rose Forest, our Trees for Climate funding, we can support the planning separate to that planning grant from the Forestry Commission, making sure that we've got good, well-designed projects that meet the UK forestry standard, that will hopefully pass through the regulatory process quickly if relevant, and really give the landowner and partners, you know, kind of a sense that, you know, something of great value is going to be achieved, and it's sort of the steps needed are set out in great detail. We can also look at supporting the delivery. So, you know, there's a range of options that are available, whether people want to do the work themselves, engage with contractors, or within the community forests, you know, use the fantastic and sort of ever expanding community and volunteer resource that is available to who want to get involved in the creation and maintenance of new woodland. The organisations that are present today, the White Rose Forest, the Forestry Commission and the Woodland Trust, we all work together in what we describe as a one-team approach. So one of the great things about this is that, you know, whoever you speak to, there's an opportunity for you to be signposted to what is the most suitable funding source that's out there. It can be quite complicated. Funding changes from time to time. There are a lot of opportunities available, and for some woodlands, one or more funding sources may be more suitable, or for the owners, depending on sort of the terms and conditions, the obligations, etc., or the design of your woodland. So the key thing really is that we would sort of really encourage people to do is if you've got any woodland creation, but certainly linked to ancient woodland, is contact one of our organisations in the first instance, and we can sort of signpost you through that process, support, work out the level of support that you need. We know that not everybody's an expert in woodland creation and forestry, and therefore we'll be starting from a low base, but we can provide that support. And then there are others who are, you know, highly skilled practitioners, been in the business for a long time, and really what I'm looking for is understanding, you know, in terms of what support, financial support, etc., is available to their plans. So that's what we'd really encourage. You know, it's very complicated to go through everything at this stage, but simply say, if you're interested, please get in touch, and we can take it from there. So our contact is the White Rose Forest at kirklees.gov.uk. Send us an email. All we need is a location and a contact, and we can start that process and then work out which of our organisations is best placed to support you in realising your woodland creation ambitions. Very quick, but I think that's that's the key message really. Just get in touch.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Ewan, for that. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a bit of inspiration and a bit of information as well. I'm going to move on to the question and answer section. So the first question that we've had, I'm going to put this one to Richard, because it's around applying for the Forestry Commission grants, and how easy is it to do that? How easy is it for just a member of the public to do that, Richard? You're on mute. You're on mute.
Sorry, Sian, thank you. Relatively easy. The Woodland Management Plan grants. Yeah, so the an owner or tenant landlord can apply for the grants. Essentially, you apply to the RPA, and once you get the grant approved, then you create the Woodland Management Plan. Once the Woodland Management Plan is approved by the Forestry Commission, then you can claim for the money that would either go to an agent who carried out the work for you. So yeah, relatively easy, but I can put a link in the chat now for some direction on how to get that started.
Yeah, so I mean it is relatively straightforward. I think the initial stage of kind of registering with the Rural Payments Agency can take a while, but you know, again, you know, there's advice and support available, so you know, if you're not sure, you know, come and ask somebody. I was just going to ask you a related question, because I don't think you covered it in your talk, and I know that it might be a question for some of the people on the webinar today, which is, you know, I know that some of these grants, or you know, certainly the Woodland Management Planning Grant, I think is only available for woods over 3 hectares. Is that right? Woodland
Creation Planning Grant, yeah, it's
sorry, the Woodland Management Planning Grant.
Woodland Management, yeah, it's over 3 hectares. So there's different levels of funding between however big the woodland is on the whole, and so all of the woodland has to be included in the Woodland Management Plan. So between 3 and 10 hectares, I think it was £1,000 hectare. I'll have to double check that, but yeah. It's for 3 hectares and above.
Yeah, so people who've got very small areas of woodland, which you know might be woodlot owners or small woodland owners, You know, there is there a process that they can follow for producing a management plan, or any grants they can apply for woodland management?
I think there's a smaller woodland management plan for from 1 hectare to 3. So it's not as extensive as a full woodland management plan. It's just a condensed version essentially. But the grant is for anything above 3.
Yeah. So, I mean, my answer to that, you know, I'm asking the question, but I know that on the previous webinar, we did have small woodland owners who were interested. So I'm just going to answer my own question for you. Is that if the Forestry Commission grants aren't applicable to you, then Woodland Trust may be able to help you with getting your management plan done, and with, you know, small scale works in your wood if you're not able to apply for the Forestry Commission grant. So do, you know, to say, get in touch with one of us and we can signpost you. Liam, did you want to add something there?
Yeah, also just to maybe mention that where rhododendron is an issue in woodlands, if it's close to an outbreak of phytophthora, like Richard mentioned, you can get funding to help with that without having to have a management plan. So even if you're a small woodland but you've got a lot of rhododendron, it's well worth looking into that and speaking to Richard and or myself, and we can kind of help with that potentially. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move on to, so Liz Milner has asked a question in the chat about whether there's any advisors in Yorkshire on heritage features and how to identify them. And then a second question about what invasive non-native species would you identify as requiring managing? I'll put that one to you, Liam, for the heritage features side of things.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and they're probably the hardest part of the job, really, because there's these lumps and bumps in a woodland and you think there's something significant there, I'm not sure what. So there is quite a lot of good guidance out there. There are various things online, publications that we use that sort of taught you through how to identify common features in an ancient wood. In Yorkshire, there's been a lot of really good work by, I think he might have left the university now, but he was Professor Ian Rotherham, and he wrote a good book called, or co-authored a book called Woodland Heritage Manual. And you can find that online, and there's some good guidance around that you can freely access. And then, you know, if we were looking at an ancient wood that had really significant archaeological features in it, we'd start trying to contact county archaeologists, potentially West Yorkshire Archaeological Society, and start kind of networking with people to see if we can get a bit more involvement. So there is help out there. It is tricky, but there's a lot of interest in it, and I think you can kind of join up the dots, really.
There's also things like LiDAR data, which we can sometimes access. So if you had a visit from one of us to advise you on your ancient wood and to have a look at you know, what was there with you, and maybe produce a report for you, we would try and access all those different sources of information and see what we could piece together for you. So there is help. And then in terms of the invasive non-natives that might require management, I don't know, Richard, did you want to?
Sorry, say that again, Shan, sorry.
Sorry, did you want to have a go at answering the question about what invasive non-native species are identified as requiring management? Yeah,
so we'd be looking at rhododendron, ponticum initially. And like Liam said, any sort of rhododendron within 3 kilometres of a active statutory plant health notice, there's money there to help get that cleared. We'd be looking at Himalayan balsam to remove that, identify that within the woodland management plan, and remove it under higher tier. Japanese knotweeds, giant hogweed, species like that.
Yeah,
we'll be looking at definitely for an identification of a rough area in the woodland management plan, and then under higher tier we'd agree on an area of destruction essentially throughout the 5-year plan.
Yeah. Anybody want to add anything to that, Liam? Have you got any species to add to that?
Yeah, there's also the odd kind of escapee from gardens, especially in urban, peri-urban ancient woods. So, you know, often in our surveys, we'll pick up things like isolated patches of cotoneaster, variegated yellow archangel can come out of gardens, things like that. So if it looks a bit unusual, we're happy to have a look, and you can always send photos and things. And some of those there's not specific funding to help with, but if you go into the woodland improvement like Rich has been talking about, that funding can help with that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've got another couple of questions in the Q&A. So I've got Francis wanting to know, in terms of woodland creation, is there a set list of species that you can plant? So would it be possible to plant things like cobnut or edible hedges? I'm going to give that one to you, Ewan, to answer.
Yeah, I had to Google cobnut plat, actually, I have to admit. Not being familiar with the Kentish wheel, though. So in terms of a set planting list, no, there isn't. But there is you need, what we would ask people in terms of, and I think all the funding options would ask people to consider the species carefully. So the mantra is always right tree, right place. So that would reflect, what is the most suitable type of, particularly if you plant near ancient woodland, that it is native, that it is suitable for the site. So you're using things like ecological site classification tools from forest research, that you're linking that to the appropriate MVC type of woodland. So as long as the species is within that, there is also sort of scope to allow, small percentages of other species within there. That may again depend on the funding options. And certainly, in terms of building sustainability, the idea that, where we're sort of looking at sort of, kind of types of woodland that are offering the foraging or food for wildlife, etc., that would be also to be encouraged. So I think the key is, making sure, I think it's right tree, right place, and it's sort of, working with, if required, sort of the advisors to identify that going forward. I think the average time span, why do you want me to go on to that one as well? I think it's one of the sort of classic questions of, it could be anything. You've got to factor in a number of issues, the regulation periods. There are sort of set periods where the projects have to go into the public register or through the IA process, so that can take some time. You need time to consult with the various stakeholders as part of the process. But also, importantly, there may be some issues that require seasonally sort of significant surveys. So, you can't do breeding bird surveys in the middle of winter. So therefore, depending on the time that you take, there could be a lag waiting either for those surveys to start or once they have started to finish. So it could be anything. From a White Rose Forest perspective, we've had projects that have been out with the regulatory process, and we've managed to turn those around in a number of weeks. And then there are other very significant projects which, because of the scale that's involved, the number of stakeholders, etc., they can take quite some time. 2 to 3 years is not unknown, but they are very significant projects, on a national scale. So ideally, if someone is thinking about planting next planting season, the sooner you get your application in, or your expression of interest to the relevant organisation, we can start. Spring is a good time for us to be looking at sites to sort of identify what's there, etc., and then hopefully you'd be in a position to plant later on this year. So the sooner the better. But yeah, the average time span probably is kind of it. There's no such thing really, but yeah, but if we can do 6 to 9 months, that would be very good.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're thinking about planting trees and you want to do it next winter, don't leave it till September to start the process, because it can take a wee while. Richard, just in terms of that kind of time from applying for a grant to getting things signed and sealed, for woodland management, is that different? I mean, there's a window, isn't there, for applications for stewardship that people
Yeah, so we'd look for woodland management plans to be in with us by the end of December, if the landowner is wanting to take on the higher tier the following year. So yeah, woodland management plans in, and if they're of a good standard, we'll look to take them on and get them through to higher tier. Higher tier applications at the minute, I think the deadline's the end of April for higher tier applications for a start the following January. That's what they are at the minute. So yeah, but the general woodland management plan, it's open all year. It's all, the draft can be submitted whenever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say the time to be thinking, you know, if you're starting you're a new woodland owner, or you've not got a woodland management plan, then this is a brilliant time of year to start thinking about it, particularly for ancient woodland. This is the time in spring, sort of March through to end of June, where you really get the opportunity to see what there is in the wood in terms of the ground flora, and that gives you an indication really of the biodiversity in the wood. So you know, I would really encourage you, if you haven't already signed up, to have a site visit from one of us, you know, following the letter that came round. Do, you know, and you would like one, do sign up, because, you know, we've got the time in at the moment to do it, and we'd really love to come and see your wood in the springtime if it's possible, if you're wanting a visit. So don't be shy, no obligation, and we love walking around the woods with people and chatting about their woodlands. So, you know, let us know. I don't have any more questions in the Q&A or the chat. Does anybody want to add any more questions? Do just sort of jot things down if you want to. I just had one more question I was going to ask, just in case it applies to anybody. So from Liam, maybe if you've got a woodland and you're not sure if it is an ancient woodland or not, how do you know if it's an ancient woodland? I know that most of the people we've invited to this webinar will be here because we've identified that they've got ancient woodland, but you know, there may be woods that aren't identified, and how would you go about doing that? Yeah, so
The way we identify ancient woodland owners really quickly is to look on the Ancient Woodland Inventory, which is a system of mapping all the ancient woods. But initially, when that was first done, it only counted woods that were over 2 hectares. So, and there's a lot of little pockets and fragments of ancient wood that are under 2 hectares, which will have been missed. But if what we've been talking about today kind of sparks any ideas, rings any bells, and you think, well, actually, I've seen quite a lot of flora that wood anemone, bluebell, and I'm starting to think, you know, there's something in this. It is very possible that your wood is either too small and hasn't been picked up, or may have been missed for another reason. If you look on old maps and your woodland's on that old map, it's not foolproof, it's not a guarantee, but that's quite often a really good indicator that your wood's ancient. Things like heritage features, again, if you've got wood banks or things that suggest your wood has been around for an awful long time, your wood might have quite an irregular boundary rather than straight edges, that sort of thing. Anything that's sort of making you think, oh, hang on a minute, I think there's something in this, you can always get in touch, and we can, you know, from a desk-based perspective, kind of do a bit of research and think, oh, you know, it's quite possible we should have a look at this. For example, I looked at a wood last year that was less than 1 hectare, and it was chock full of ancient woodland features. It was really special. So really worth noting, because those are those little blocks from which woodland creation around, like Ewan was talking about, can make a massive difference.
Thanks, Liam. So I suppose just could mention that the Ancient Woodland Inventory, which Liam mentioned, which is the record of ancient woodland, was produced back in the 1980s and 1990s, and that's being updated at the moment. So, and the size threshold that they're looking at is reducing to, I think it's 0.25 hectares. So actually really small scraps of ancient woodland will get picked up on that. So even if you've got some woodland that you're aware is ancient woodland, if you've got a larger landholding, you may actually have bits that you're not aware of that are ancient, and that might come out in this new process. So you might have the opportunity to link bits, particularly along rivers and streams. You often get these little bits. So there's a question there about where can that inventory be seen. So if you go on to the DEFRA Magic Maps site, so it's magic.gov.uk, I think. The inventory is one of the layers on that. So it's quite a user-friendly map. You can home in on your geographical location, and then there are layers that you can switch on and off. And if you go to habitats woodland, then there's a little box for ancient woodland. Thanks, Liam, just put that in the chat. So habitats woodland, ancient woodland, and it will show you hatched areas where there's ancient woodland. So you'll be able to see where all the ancient woodland is in your area, and that's being updated at the moment. Liam, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just when you said about along riversides, it just made me think, if you've got wild garlic, and almost everyone knows wild garlic, you're quite likely onto a winner. So definitely check that out.
Okay, cool. So anybody else got any more questions at all? I think I've answered all the questions in the chat and the Q&A. Okay, well, in that case, I think I'll draw the webinar to a close. But again, I just encourage you, if you've not signed up for a site visit, do feel free to contact us, contact the White Rose Forest email address that you will have received your invite from, and you know, we can sort something out, whether it's on the dates that we identified or whether it's on a later date. You know, we're happy to be quite flexible if you haven't already signed up. I hope you've really enjoyed and found it useful and interesting today, and hopefully we'll see some of you out in the woods.